podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Every day can be an adventure. And with so much to do and so many places to be, I'm glad I decided to get the 2022 Honda Pilot. The Pilot can help me navigate my daily routine with ease. The kids love the available rear entertainment system and available Wi-Fi hotspot. I love the available hands-free power tailgate. So convenient when my hands are full. And with all the available seat configurations, I can make room for all the friends, family, and pets that come along. Discover the 2022 Honda Pilot. See your local Honda dealer today.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis Podcast with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. I've got George Bellshaw, the tennis writer, with me. George, how are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Feel quite tired today. It feels like just there's a lot going on everywhere, every which way I look. So I might not be at my sprightliest today. But
it's very dark.
I'm generally okay.
All right. It's good to hear. And I've also got, as always, tennis coach Calvin Betton. Calvin, how are you?
Yeah, very well, very well.
What's the T-shirt this week? What band is the T-shirt this week?
Well, it's a mock-up actually, because it is. It's obviously the Prince Purple Rain T-shirt, but it is Randy Watson from Coming to America and his band Sexual Chocolate.
Right. Okay.
Sexual Chocolate.
Almost exclusively gone over my head.
If you've not seen, if you or anyone listening hasn't seen Coming to America, you have to see it.
Is this a film? I don't even know what we're talking about.
I mean, this is astonishing. It's a film that is right in the middle of Eddie Murphy's purple era, his real peak era, which was probably the most peak era that anyone's ever had in the 80s.
It's quite funny how last week we were like, we dare not talk about music with Calvin because you're going to really upset him. I think films might also be off the list.
Yeah.
If you can't not like Coming to America. I'm going to set you both a mission before next week's podcast that you have to watch Coming to America, and I guarantee you'll tell me it was brilliant.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. But I will try and watch it. There you go.
And you'll understand why the T-shirt is funny then.
Right. Okay. I've got quite a long train journey next weekend, so maybe that's the answer. We've got loads to talk about today, quite apart from Eddie Murphy. We'll talk about Novak Djokovic and his magic potion. We'll talk about the Billie Jean King Cup, where Switzerland were crowned champions. We'll talk about Caroline Garcia, because she's won the WTA finals, albeit that did happen just a few hours after we did our podcast last week, so it's slightly old news. Cam Norrie's been getting in trouble for playing in Saudi Arabia. There's a new tennis event that we've got a few more details on. Rafa Nadal's had a losing start to the ATP finals, and Calvin's going to say the word. Well, I'm not going to say the word, but Calvin later is going to say a word that means a sort of internet joke. And if you're listening and you heard him say it the other week, you know what I'm talking about. But we'll come back to that. I think this was maybe the place to start if we were recording this 3 or 4 days ago, but since it's the first time we've recorded since the Novak Djokovic video emerged and just created an absolute firestorm on Twitter, it seems appropriate that we should start with it. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's everywhere. You can pretty much just Twitter search Djokovic bottle or Djokovic dodgy or anything like that, and the video will come up. Basically, it shows his physio preparing something that you can't see out of shot, like in the stands, and everyone around him getting quite sort of nervous about other people seeing. There's someone filming it, and everyone gets a bit tense, and then the bottle gets sealed and given to the ball girl who runs it off to Novak Djokovic. All hell then ensues. The video, I think, got something like 20 million views, and Jelena Djokovic failed her Communications 101 exam, because the best thing you can do with something like this is don't say anything about it, because clearly none of us can write anything about it. The second Jelena Djokovic opened her Twitter account and started writing things, all of the journalists went, oh, well, we can write about it now because we can just write about her talking about it. She said on Twitter, I don't see anything dodgy. In fact, I see people trying to be private about their business in a world where everyone feels like they have a right to point a camera at you whenever they want. Apparently wanting/trying to be private makes you dodgy nowadays. You'll find out soon, but I can't speak about it now. You'll find out soon, is what Djokovic said when he was questioned about a very similar thing at Wimbledon earlier this year. Yelena kind of mirrored that a little bit. She said he will talk when he is ready to talk. This whole nonsense about making people speak about something they are not ready because others are impatient is absurd. Sit a bit in silence. Mind yourself more. Not everything you see is controversial. It could be private. Is that allowed? George?
Is it allowed? I think it's more difficult, isn't it, when you're actually in the world of kind of high-profile athleticism, and when we've seen over the years people ultimately do cheat in sport and they do everything's kind of taken advantage. And I'm not for a second saying that is what Djokovic is doing. He clearly thinks there's some advantage in this, and he'll sell it as a trade secret. Which I suppose he has his rights to do, and I think he said over the summer actually talked about potentially selling this thing in the future, which he may not want to do now. So if that is the case, then it is potentially a totally legitimate thing. But you still have to be there to answer questions, and it's just the manner of it all that just invites weird questions. You don't see many people do it, and for years he's like. I was watching the match live when this happened, and I saw the ball girl run on to get something from the stands, and I've seen that happen so many times with Djokovic that I actually didn't even bat an eyelid. But even that in itself is kind of a bit odd. Why you wouldn't just have prepared drinks on the sideline or whatever.
Yeah,
but it depends what you're mixing. But
yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? And I mean, the thing is, what I don't get is there some sort of drink, and maybe this is the trade secret, but is there something here that you can't pre-mix? You have to have it exactly mixed at this moment, 3 minutes before you drink it. So Djokovic can't do it on the bench, because he wouldn't be able to drink it when he needs to drink it. I mean, that's the only thing that kind of justifies that.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of things I was thinking about, actually, I kind of thought maybe from a smell perspective again, I don't remember a few ages ago we talked about kind of Andreescu having that little jar. I wasn't sure if there's a bit of a kind of a sensory thing that comes from kind of quick mix rather than later. Right. That might be complete nonsense. I was also, the other thing I was kind of thinking of was a protein shake, if you have that sitting around, is quite gross.
Does it get a bit sort of claggy?
Yeah, but I don't know if you'd want a protein shake actually in the middle of a match.
No.
But that's this kind of texture that might be a bit gross. But I don't know, it's just all a bit weird. I mean, it surely isn't that hard for him to just have the sachet on the side, if it is a sachet, and just pour it in himself and just have it in a black wrapper or something. I don't know, it's just all a bit odd, isn't it? But probably not much more we can say in terms of speculating what it is.
Well, no, I mean, we can speculate what it is as much as we want. I mean, the fact is it's not doping, Calvin, because what person in their right mind would dope courtside? Irrespective of the fact that Novak Djokovic has never been found to be doping and is not a doper and all the rest of that, the kind of things that we have to say from a legal perspective and which are true, but notwithstanding all of that, even Lance Armstrong wouldn't sit there and dope at the side of a race.
No, he used to get guys to drive up on mopeds in the middle of the race and give him those. So, I'm not sure about that. I'd find it very, very hard to believe that there's anything dodgy going on in there. But it's more just weirdness from Djokovic again, isn't it? I was trying to think, what could he possibly... It seems that he tells them something and they mix the drink based on what he tells them. But how many things can he tell them? He can either go, I'm knackered, and they're going to give him something, or he can go I need a quick lift, and that's something else. What else can he possibly tell them? You can't tell them I'm 72% tired or something like that. So that changes it. It's either you're knackered or you're not. But the thing what I found most concerning in it, and I have a real issue with this, and I don't know if I word it properly because I'm not as eloquent with words as you two guys are, but it's how it's been dismissed that we shouldn't even talk about this. And that I find to be a major concern, that we shouldn't even discuss that we shouldn't even discuss the idea at all. Well, no, we should. I don't think as James said, they're not going to be mixing any sort of dodgy substance at the side of the court in plain view of everybody. I actually don't even know if it was if it was supposed to be shady and secretive, I think the guy just had it on the floor, which is where you would generally mix things if it's a bottle and he's putting some powder in there or something, and the camera couldn't really see it. I don't really think he was purposefully covering anything up. He wouldn't really know there was a camera there. But the idea that we shouldn't even discuss the topic is ludicrous and naive at best.
I think you're absolutely right. And as I pointed out to someone on Twitter, I can't really remember who it was, doping in sport is rife. Anyone who doesn't believe that, I think, is quite naive.
Yeah.
There is a lot of doping in sport, and we haven't caught all of it, and it's dangerous. And when we do catch people, it damages the sport, and it also damages athletes, which is arguably the bigger problem. So we absolutely should talk about it, and not having transparency creates more problems because it creates more smoke screens, which makes it harder for us to create a transparent, clean sport. I'm not saying Djokovic absolutely has to tell us exactly what was in that bottle, but I think creating this weird smoke screen where he calls it a magic potion and then says, I can't tell you what it is because I'm going to sell it, and of course he hasn't yet, I think that's a real problem.
It's also just human nature. People cheat at things. It's human nature. That happens. Are we to believe that the top 200 tennis players in the world are the most morally fair people in the world and they've never even considered it? It's ludicrous to suggest that somebody inside the top 100 in the world will currently be cheating in one way or another. That is the nature of sport. In any sport, that is the case. So also to go, oh, well, he's never tested positive. And again, I'll stress again, I don't think that there's anything dodgy at all going on with this. That doesn't mean anything. Lance Armstrong never tested positive in his career. Yeah. It took him to admit to that he was doping. But also, you can't just decide that somebody isn't cheating because they're your favorite player. That's not how it works. And that seems to have been what all Djokovic's supporters, his weird bunch of fans, have come out this week and based their sort of information on. Well, he's definitely not cheating because it's Novak and he wouldn't. Like, maybe he wouldn't, but we're not. That doesn't hold any weight.
Who's ever heard of tribal tennis fans, though? Who'd have seen it? Just going back to one of the earlier points you made, Calvin, about what he'd say to the box that might change it. He is weird enough for it, and this is kind of what I was saying about the scent kind of thing. He is weird enough for it to be something like based on a certain twinge of emotion and be quite a weird, like hippie-esque thing that is there could be some sort of aspect that's then triggered by a certain flavor or smell that actually changes within the match. And that just is totally not beyond the realms. I have no idea what that would be for the record, but there's loads of stuff in kind of yoga and stuff like that you want certain smells to trigger certain things that can kind of make you feel that in certain moments. That seems right up his bloody street. So if it is something like that, and he's going to release a range one day called Novak's special potions, and you take one for when you're feeling angry, or one when you're feeling sad, one when you're feeling tired, or whatever, could all be like juju juice and nonsense, but that wouldn't surprise me either, to be honest.
I mean, this is the thing that I wrote in the paper, and I wasn't suggesting anything about Djokovic, but you have to remember that one of Djokovic's best mates and biggest sort of allies is Chervan Jafaria, who, for people who don't know him, he calls himself a health expert and a sort of wellness genius. He's got a podcast called Wake the Fake Up, and his brand Symbiotica, spelt not the usual way in any form or shape, sells lots of things, but the one I choose quite often is called Liquid Gold, which apparently promotes healing in the body of specific deficiencies, but also has the positive effect of helping activate full cellular potential. Bullshit is the technical term.
He's basically Jeremy off Peep Show. Is that guy? There's definitely an arc of Peep Show where that is based on that guy's. I've seen him talk, and he's basically that. But I suspect it will be that Djokovic is going to try selling whatever he's taking down the line. I think that's, and probably more so now, being that kids all over the world are desperately chasing this energy drink, this Prime thing. I don't know whether anyone's seen that.
Oh, no, this is news
to me. A few of my
me.
mates have told me about it.
What's that?
You're just too down with the kids today, Calvin.
No, well, my mates have told me that their kids are desperately trying to get it, and I've seen it on social media. It's an energy drink. I don't even know if it's what it is. It's an American energy drink called Prime, and apparently it's selling out everywhere. And I assume a few famous people have been seen drinking it.
I've just googled it's by Logan Paul and KSI, who are possibly two of my least favorite people in the world.
Right.
They're idiot YouTube influencers who.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Logan Paul does the boxing stuff, and KSI does as well, doesn't he? But that'll be why it's selling out so much.
So seeing how quickly that's sold out, then I think Djokovic is probably going to try selling something. That's probably what it is.
I mean, I'm kind of surprised it's not already on the market. Like, given that he's obviously been doing this for a long time, and he's never had a problem monetizing his brand. But anyway, that's probably something that we're going to hear a lot about further down the line, so maybe we don't need to talk about it. But yes, I think the general solution here is to keep talking about it. And obviously, Twitter, now more than ever, is a completely a complete... I don't even know what the word for it is anymore. I mean, it's just... Cesspit doesn't even cover it. And sure, people on Twitter probably shouldn't just be randomly accusing people of doping without any evidence, but that is the citizen journalism that Elon Musk would like to promote. So, all hail Elon. Anyway, the point is, Novak is not doping, but it doesn't mean we can't talk about doping in tennis.
Also, I think we should say as well, and I'm pretty confident in saying this, Djokovic will love the fact that everyone's talking about it, because it gives him the attention that he loves, and it allows him and his fans to create this them against the world vibe again, that they have to defend him, and it's everyone. It's all that. I think I'd seen it this week. It's just you corrupt journalists who are suggesting that he's doing anything odd. So he 100% knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I even saw Yelena on Twitter talking about journalists with a secret agenda, and it's just, the tinfoil hat has firmly gone on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, but at least if you're listening to this podcast, you've got some common sense on the issue, I like to think. I hope we've been able to offer that. Should we move on and talk about the BJK Cup? Because some actual tennis took place in Britain over the last 7 days. I was there for much of it. Had to come back on Friday, so I didn't get to see Great Britain's semi-final, but millions did, because it was live on the BBC here in the UK as they took on Australia. They were, of course, beaten in the end, very disappointingly, but it went right down to the wire. It was a champions tiebreak, as they call it, in the doubles, so you can't say they didn't give it their best go. Switzerland, of course, were crowned champions. They beat Australia in the final. And a pretty good final, but I think Australia would be pretty gutted not to have got closer to them. Both Switzerland and Australia, of course, lost in the latter stages last year. Switzerland beat Australia in the semi-finals, and then Russia beat Switzerland. So Jill Teichmann and Belinda Bencic going one step further than last year. George, pre-tournament, I don't think, and maybe this is remiss of us, but I don't think we had really picked out Switzerland as particularly strong, contenders.
Well, I'm pretty sure before the group stages, I said I'm 100% certain Great Britain won't come out the group as well. So my predictions were a bit off. I think there are a few issues with some of the teams I consider to be better, weren't there? So the Czechs lost Krejcikova. Goff was kind of arriving from the WTA finals and maybe not fresh. Some of the better teams didn't have things in their favour. Poland without Swiatek, etc. So it did fall that way. I mean, they were good. Bencic and Teichmann are good players. Had okay last couple of years. So I wouldn't say there was much gloss on this event as a whole. Like, in terms of, it's a shame we didn't get the absolute best players playing it. It was good for Britain to do well. That possibly actually, I don't want to say saved the event, but gave a little bit of impetus, even though it's kind of farcical that Britain were knocked out in the qualifiers and have now ended up as semi-finalists. But yeah, I think it's again coming back to this problem around the calendar, isn't it? And just making a rod out of his own back unnecessarily. So Yeah.
Let's come back to the sort of logistical issues because there are a lot of them. I want to talk about them, but I do want to briefly talk about the tennis because, as you say, Great Britain to an extent did save the event because it was on for being a pretty unmitigated disaster. Iga Świątek pulling out, Barbara Krejcikova, who was going to play for the Czechs and probably lead the best team in the tournament, pulling out with what she said was a hand injury, but pretty clearly was the fact that she would have arrived about 6 hours before her first match. Coco Gauff got benched for the first USA match because she had only just arrived from Fort Worth, and then she lost to Katerina Siniakova, which is just doesn't make any sense to me, quite badly as well. Even Elise Mertens, and I know she's not the biggest superstar in the world, but she spent 20 hours flying from Texas to Glasgow, arrived at 10:30 at night, went to bed, got up the next day, they couldn't play her in the singles because she was knackered. She played the doubles. She then played the singles in the second tie and had to withdraw injured, having been a set and a break up. It just, the scheduling hurt almost everyone, bar the Brits, who pulled off, after losing their first two matches against Kazakhstan, they were pretty much dead and buried. They had to win all four of their remaining matches, including two doubles matches for a debutante pair, Alicia Barnett and Olivia Nichols. And they did so in 4 consecutive straight sets wins. And as I say, they got pretty bloody close to beating Australia, a 10-6 champions tiebreak after Harriet Dart had upset Ayla Tomljanovic in the number one singles. Calvin, I know you watched a decent amount of the Billie Jean King Cup. It's a pretty uncelebrated team, with the greatest of respect to all of them. Harriet Dart is world number 98, I think. This was not a team who were expected to do anything, and they pulled off a couple of really good results.
Yeah, they did. They played well in some of the matches. I've got mixed feelings on it, to be honest, and I don't want to sound like a grumpus here, but I've seen a lot of. I'll say, first of all, I thought they played excellent. I thought Harriet Dart was excellent. I thought the two doubles girls were fantastic, and really showed what can be done with if you get a doubles team who can know how to play together and that kind of thing. I thought that the coaching staff obviously helped along the way, and they must have had some decent analysis and some decent tactical advice. I thought that was all good because they performed well. On the flip side of it, I've seen a lot of the LTA patting themselves on the back for it and how well they've done. And their record in Billie Jean King Cup this year is 1-1 and lost 3. I think. And I found it weird how we were calling that. I've seen numerous references to our success and how things showed in the results. I also thought, and again, I'll take some stick for this. I thought the response from the team was a bit too happy, being that they'd lost at the end. And again, the quotes, I'd seen one of the players. I'm not naming names here. I've seen one of the players saying that. I'll read it. I absolutely loved it. I had the time of my life. Right, but you won one match and lost 2 and went out in the semis. And other things like about how we showed what we can do out there. We played great. We showed what happens when we play for each other, and the results showed that. Again, didn't win anything. You won one match, and I think, and as well, and my last word on this, because probably depressing everybody with it, is they didn't play like they thought they were going to win. And the two doubles girls, I think they're great girls. I really do. But I just thought the getting pumped up, I wasn't a fan of it, if I'm honest, for little points. It was too much. It was way too much. And I think when you're doing that, what I take from that from the other team would be, if I was on the other team, would be these two don't think they're going to win because they're too happy at winning things like getting it to 3-all and stuff like that.
Great to have Gabby Agbonglahor, Chief Superintendent of the Celebration Police, on the podcast.
No, it's not even the celebration, though. It's not even the celebration. It's how you approach a match, how you control your emotions in the match, and it just felt to me like they didn't They didn't think. If you think you're going to win a match, you don't behave like that.
And I suppose that's a touch of inexperience on the big stage as well. Like, I saw someone on Twitter, and I think I posted it in the group, saying, oh, these girls aren't unknowns. They've won a WTA title. I'm like, well, they won the WTA 250 in, I think, Granby, which is creditable, but this is, and I don't say this lightly, they were the biggest matches of their lives. Like, home crowd, representing their country, 100% the biggest matches of their lives. So a little bit of inexperience showing there, perhaps, getting pumped up at the wrong moments. That said, and I do take your point, Calvin, that they did only win one match, although they won 5 matches and only won 1 tie. I know I'm splitting hairs there. But what impressed me was... And I know you're not going to like this because of what you just said, but they didn't take themselves too seriously. Because let's face it, and they kind of said it all week, they came in here and they were underdogs. Like, they weren't going to win anything. Like, they were a worse team than all the teams they were going to play, pretty much. And, they were down and out after they lost the first 2 singles matches, and we were like, we were like, well, that's that. I can't believe it came all the way up to Glasgow to watch them lose 2 singles and basically go out. And then 2 girls who've never played for their country before go out and win 2 great doubles matches and got blooming close to winning a 3rd one. And so that for me was people playing above the expectations that most people had of them. And while I appreciate, yes, they still didn't win anything, there's no way I thought I would see Harriet Dart, especially after she got frankly blown away by Elena Rybakina. There's no way I thought she'd go out and beat Paula Badosa and Ayla Tomljanovic in the space of a couple of days. Like, that is remarkable, I thought, Calvin.
Yeah, listen, I thought Harriet was actually excellent. I really did, and played well above what we would expect from her. And I thought she displayed what I'm talking about. She had a real control of her emotions, and she looked like she thought she was going to win. Now, I know Harriet a little bit. I know all the girls in there, and what I will say is all of those girls are lovely girls. That I don't have a bad word to say about any of them. But Harriet, the way she was controlling her emotions was that when she looked at the opponents was, I'm going to beat you. And whether that was going to happen, I didn't know, but she was entirely convinced the whole time that she was going to win. They were actually the only 2 matches, although, there's been a lot of talk about playing above expectation and that kind of thing. They were the only 2 matches that Britain won that you wouldn't have thought they were going to win. For all that, like, the 2 Kazakh girls were Rybakina is a good singles player, but don't think, I didn't make her a major doubles threat. The Spanish girls weren't a very good doubles pair. I thought Lissy and Liv were going to beat them. They're a good doubles pair, Lissy and Liv. So I don't know if I'd say that they won matches that they weren't expected to win. I think, you could say the first one, the Kazakhstan match, was 50-50 based on the fact that Rybakina was playing in it. But the Spanish one, I thought, they were going to win that. And the second one, I'd have made them slight underdogs in, and they lost it slightly.
George?
I think just, on Dart, I mean, I still think we're looking at a Dart who's at close to her ceiling. Like, I would genuinely be quite surprised if she made the
Love
top
Tennis
50,
podcast ceiling alert. Watch this get smashed.
Yeah. But, like, she's got real limitations to her game in terms of serve, in terms of height, just broadly in terms of power, that makes it really hard to see her having this, like, a top 50 career. But bloody hell, she's had some great wins this year.
Yeah.
She's beaten Badosa, she's beaten Svitolina, she's beaten Kasatkina. Obviously Tomljanovic, who, okay, I know people will write about top 20 wins this year, but Tomljanovic is a good player. She's gone deep in
Tomljanovic is
slams.
kind of like one of those players who is between 20 and 50 in the world, and it doesn't really make a difference if she's 21 or 49.
Yeah. And I think, like, genuinely, the Dart to have pulled off a few of those wins this year has been really impressive, because I don't think she's at the level where she can genuinely beat top 30 players easily or often. So to have 4 of them within a year is really impressive. And it's not changed my opinion on how high she can go, but it's another good step in her career where she's got herself in the top 100. She's beaten some good players. She'll now probably feel she can get there. And we love being proven wrong on this podcast by Brits who go way beyond their ranking ceilings. So good luck to her.
It's funny you say that, George, because actually on the train down, I was having a full-on journalist moment because someone rang me back. I wasn't expecting to ring me back, and I did an interview in the vestibule of the train, like wedged between two doors, like phone squeezed between my jaw and shoulder, and like taking notes on my laptop. And the person who rang me back was Alan Jones, who used to coach. He used to coach Joe Jury and Elena Baltaccia and Jeremy Bates, I think, as well. But also used to coach Harriet Dart for a couple of years. And he was, he's not someone who really cares what people think of what he says, which I quite like, obviously. And I said, did you ever think Harriet would, produce wins on this level? He said no. He said that she used to say to him, why don't you come out on tour with me? Because I think he was based in Malaga. But anyway, he didn't go out on tour with Harriet. And she used to say, why won't you come out on tour with me? And he said, look, I did that. I did 35 years of that. I'm not travelling anymore. But if you make top 100, I'll come. Basically assuming that she never would. And then when she made top 100, he texted her and said, I've got the suitcase out the loft. I'm ready. But I think she'd actually already moved on at that point. But I think a lot of people probably think that. Not a lot of people know who Harriet Dart is because she's not had those big results at Wimbledon. Basically, that's how you get British people to know who you are, is do something really special at Wimbledon. But these results are mounting up now. You mentioned the name she's beaten this year, George. I was in the room when she burst into tears after the US Open when she had beaten Kasatkina and then went out in the second round, I think, to Daria Sneegor, unless I've misremembered that. It was Dalma Galfi, sorry. And it was a match that, she only won 4 games, but on paper she probably was favourite going into that match, especially having beaten the number 10 seed. And she just said, I feel burnt out. I'm just completely burnt out. So to go from there and then 6-8 weeks later to turn up and do what she did, I think that's particularly impressive.
Yeah, even before that, every step I think of Dart's career has had pretty humbling matches when she's kind of got into really good form, qualified for a slam, and then getting absolutely battered by Sharapova, for example, leaving the court in tears. She's had a lot of all this tremendous effort, and then it's just oh my God, you're just not good enough at that level. So for her to keep kind of plugging away, and as Calvin says, I think the one thing you have to say about her, she's got a good backhand, yes, but it's her mentality that's getting her there. She works really hard.
Calvin, I actually just wanted to kind of bring you in on Harriet. She's someone you've known for quite a long time, I would have thought, and presumably you have similar feelings to George that there is a ceiling because of her abilities, but maybe she's already through the initial ceiling.
She's a weird one, because I guess so, but then she has certain elements to her game, and the women's game is so crazy that you just never know. She's got a lovely touch, she's got nice feel on the ball, she's got tactical brain, and her mindset is fantastic. The problem is her serve. There's not a lot on it, and I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't know that. It's it kind of sits there and there's not much on it, but the women's game, nothing surprised me, so it wouldn't surprise me if she did end up going inside the top 50 at all.
And it's funny, George, what you said about her being so hardworking, because it's very anecdotal, and I watched one practice session because I find team practice sessions interesting. You can see a bit more and you can kind of understand a bit more about the dynamic. But it was notable that when they'd take a break and go and have a sit down and a chat, Harriet wouldn't sit down. She would be like, can I hit some short balls, please? Or she'd do more work with Ian Bates. She basically didn't really stop for the whole session. And as I say, it's only one session, and actually Heather Watson was carrying an injury, so she needed to stop, and therefore whoever she was serving and returning with had to stop as well. But it just struck me that there was a real competitive edge to her, which, you can't, this is going to sound like a real cliche, but you can't teach that. I think some people have got that real competitiveness and constant, unrelenting competitiveness, and some people don't, and you can't make them do it. So anyway, a valuable thing to have.
Social Podcast Network.
Here at the famous Sloping Pitch podcast, we're getting ready for the greatest show on earth. But would you like pitch-side seats for all the action in Qatar? The heat, the goals, the drama? Well, so would we. But why not join me, Nick Hancock, in Stoke-on-Trent and Chris England in London's SW16? Every game live from England. The famous Sloping Pitch podcast. We think this tournament could be okay.
Sport Social.
Let's move on to a different British player, someone else who we talk of as one of the hardest workers in the game, and you would suggest he's now trying to reap the benefits because Cam Norrie has signed up for the Diriyah Tennis Cup in Saudi Arabia. It's an exhibition tournament with a total of 12 players, a prize pool of about £2.5 million, not including whatever appearance fees might be flying around. Norrie was announced last week, joins Rublev, Medvedev, Zverev, Thiem, Wawrinka. I see Nick Kyrgios has also been added to the start list now as well, lengthening his season, which he said was too long, but that's neither here nor there. Norrie came in for some flack from Amnesty International specifically. They said, we're never going to be telling people like Cameron Norrie where they should or shouldn't be playing tennis, but by appearing in Diriyah, Cameron should realise he's effectively being deliberately hired in to take part in the latest jamboree of Saudi sports washing. This is clearly something that we've heard before and we've talked about in other sports, and we've maybe actually not talked about it on this particular podcast quite so much. But George, I mean, this is what happens when you go and play in these events, right? And what you have to hope is that I'm not going to say get away with it, but that no one really notices. And unfortunately, people have noticed.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, big time. It's. I don't want to say I have sympathy for Norrie because at the end of the day, he's just a bloke who will think kind of a short-sighted way. I want to make as much money as possible and kind of do it. It's just more I'm not necessarily blaming, but the comments he made afterwards about it helping him win the Australian Open or whatever is just absolutely farcical. And, he'll say he's not a politician and whatever, but ultimately sport really does affect how people view things. We see that in football all the time. We see it in all other sports. And, Norrie's not alone in making this decision, but the problem is we get to the stage where it becomes normalised and absolutely fine, and that achieves the kind of result of sports watching. So it's important we kind of keep raising these issues about these countries and, call it out really, but as you'll see many people on Twitter say, would you do the same in the same position?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Just to kind of highlight the issues that Amnesty were mentioning, earlier this year, 81 people were executed in a single day in Saudi Arabia. Lead student Salma Al-Shahab, and I apologise for that pronunciation, was given a huge jail sentence for tweeting about retweeting some dissident messages about the Saudi regime, and of course there's been no accountability for the shocking murder of Jamal Khashoggi. As a journalist, that one always kind of cuts to me a bit sort of tighter because, he was just doing what any of us do and was murdered, and it was directly, ordered by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who has his finger in a lot of pies in sport. To read out Norrie's statement, I'm not a politician and I don't feel it's right for me to get involved with individual government politics. My job is to be a professional tennis player, and this event allows me to train with some of the best players in the world and to potentially win the Australian Open. I mean, if he wants to train with some of the best players in the world, he doesn't have to go to Saudi Arabia to do it. From a PR perspective, and that in the end, journalism is a bit like PR, and I know a lot of people in PR, and not one single person said, that's a good statement. It's just moronic. He'd have been far better off saying nothing at all. We had a direct message about this, actually, and I want to put it to you, Calvin, because it came from someone referring to you. A guy called Guy Adams, who's a listener, says, forgive the unsolicited message, but long-time listener and huge fan of both the pod and Calvin. As I share my home with a Ukrainian family, I have listened with great interest over the recent months to him talking about the Wimbledon Russia ban, which I, on balance, probably disagree with. Anyhow, given that Calvin seems to have taken the sport and politics shouldn't mix line on whether Russian tennis players should be allowed to earn a shilling at our tournaments, I was quite surprised to see him taking a pop at Cam Norrie on Twitter for agreeing to take the money from the head choppers to play in Saudi next month. Could his co-hosts possibly ask him to expand on why he holds these apparently divergent opinions on your next podcast? Thanks. Calvin, The floor is yours.
Well, I don't think they are divergent opinions. The Russian players haven't done anything wrong. It's their leader who has, and I think, as we'll discuss maybe later on, the Russian players, and as far as I know, are entirely opposed to what Vladimir Putin has done. They have huge sympathy with the Ukrainians all over the world, wherever they are now. So their position has never been in question. So I don't understand why they're being punished for what someone else has done. Whereas Cam Norrie is making a conscious decision that he's going to take the money from Saudi Arabia. And I could get into that now. It's all right him saying, I mean, for starters, right, murder, mutilation, and human rights abuses are not politics. That's not what politics is. And not saying he's not getting involved in individual government politics. The government, or whatever they call it in Saudi Arabia, makes all of the decisions from that place. That's where the money will be coming from that is paying him. So he is involved in individual government politics by choosing to go and play in Saudi Arabia. So that's my answer to the question. I don't understand how they are divergent opinions at all.
I suppose the thing I suppose that Guy would say, and I don't know, maybe we'll get him on the podcast at a later date to chat about it, because I think he's actually a journalist. But I suppose what he would say is, so are we saying that sport and politics shouldn't mix or should mix?
Well, I've no problem with sport and politics mixing. I've never. I think we sport it crosses over, and politics crosses over. I've no issue with that. I don't understand. I specifically don't think there's rationale to stop Russian tennis players playing in Wimbledon because, as I said at the time, tennis players are independent contractors. They do not represent their countries in anything except for Davis Cup or Billie Jean King Cup or in the United Cup that is coming along.
I think, broadly speaking, with kind of sport and politics mixing, I wouldn't want to force every single sports star to have a huge political opinion. That is not their job, and that's totally fine. They should be allowed to have a political opinion and kind of voice that. That's also fine. But what Norrie's doing here, as Calvin's kind of pointing out, is he's making inadvertently a political statement by agreeing to take money from a regime like that. That's where his politics is coming into it, because, like it or not, that's a political choice given the kind of controversies. Well, not even controversies, the tyranny that's occurring there. So, he in my opinion, is kind of actively getting involved in that political sphere by making that active choice.
Look, yeah, absolutely. Anybody who takes any money from Saudi Arabia in sport, whether that be Newcastle Football Club or any golfers or any tennis players who are choosing to play in this, they've all had the debate with themselves, right? Can I do this? It's a lot of money. Is the money worth more than what my morals are on what I think is fair, what's going on? It's not like anybody has gone, I didn't know what was happening in Saudi Arabia. Somebody just offered me some money.
Let's not forget, this is not the first time this has happened in tennis, and probably the most famous previous episode was when Nadal and Djokovic were due to go and play there in, I think, in a £1 million match that conveniently got called off in the end because of a Nadal injury, which kind of got them out of that one. But, he's not the first and he won't be the last to do this, and I'm not having a go at him that way, but he does also have to understand that he's made this decision and you have to accept the consequences, even if it is going to be a great amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, listen, right, I don't know Cam overly well. What I do know of him, I'm a big fan of his as a person and as a competitor, but I found the statement hugely disingenuous as well. That's where I had an issue with, and I don't get why. And it's the same with, I have the same issue with the golfers who go. I'd almost feel better. It's a bit uncouth, but I'd feel fine if they just went, look, it's a lot of money, but it can help me sort me and my family out for a long time to come. It's a lot of money. And I'm not aligning with them politically or anything. It's just a lot of money. But they never say that. They never say it's this nonsense. And somebody said to me on Twitter, a friend of mine said that he'd had a debate with one of his friends saying, how would we approach it if one of our friends said that they were going to work in Saudi Arabia? And I said to him, the difference is, if one of our friends said that, they'd say exactly that. Look, I've been offered a right whack of money here. It's a huge amount of money. I'm not loaded, but it can sort me, my wife, and my kids out for my lifetime. I'm going to take it. These sports people are not saying that. They're coming up with this nonsense about it's good for their career, and I'm not getting. Your friend wouldn't say to you, if either of you guys, James, if your friend said he was going, and you went, "Oh, I don't know about that, mate, Saudi Arabia," he wouldn't go to you, "Oh, I'm not getting involved in politics, James." It's just not a natural thing to do. And just say, it's fine. Just say, look, it's a lot of money. And Cam's not, Cam's made good money in his career, but I doubt he's at the stage where he'll never have to work again. It's fine for him to say, look, it's a lot of money to turn down. Yeah. Why can't they just say that?
Yeah, and that's the thing. By saying what he said, he's eliminated the chance for anyone to assume that might be the case. Like, if he hadn't said anything, we probably would have sat here and gone, well, the reality is it's a lot of money for a guy like him who hasn't made, retirement money, and, well, I suppose. But because he's come and said, I'm not getting involved in the politics, I'm just there to get good practice before Australia, it's like, oh, mate.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'd say on it about the sports washing thing, maybe the last thing on this, is that I'm not even sure that sports washing is working, because loads of people are now talking about Saudi Arabia being murderous and human rights abusive and that kind of thing. So, and it's just, whether that be through Newcastle or Live Golf or now this tennis thing and the Qatar thing, I'm not sure it's actually working at all. It's probably having the opposite effects. I don't think anybody would be talking about Saudi Arabia otherwise.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say is, like, Norrie's probably kind of invited some awkward questions for himself at the Australian Open as well. Just like, when he inevitably does not win the Australian Open, or like if he has a first round exit there, you could ask a cheeky question, why did this go so wrong when you had the perfect preparation heading off to Saudi Arabia that you said would give you the chance to win it? That would be a bit of an arse thing to ask, but it's a perfectly legitimate question.
Yeah. I note that Nick Kyrgios, who's playing ATP doubles finals this week in Turin, has skipped all of his press responsibilities. And at the same time has just been announced as another player in the Diriyah Tennis Cup. Yeah, well, exactly. I'm going to go break the fourth wall and say we didn't talk about the Billie Jean King Cup wider issues because we got so carried away talking about the tennis and Harriet Dart. And I did say we come back to it, and I do have things I want to say about it. So just to kind of pull a big U-turn so our listeners don't get too seasick, this event was only just a success. It was still a loss-making venture. The LTA will have lost money on it, absolutely no doubt about that. They sold a few tickets on Saturday. I think they got maybe 4,000 in the end. But realistically, it was a failure, and a lot of the top players weren't there. Part of that is due to the fact that it doesn't sit in the right part of the calendar. It was straight after WTA Finals. It started, I think, 10 hours after WTA Finals finished, which is just a complete joke. I have a little piece I want to say about this, which is Billie Jean King was very keen to say this is the World Cup of tennis. And all over the place it says World Cup of tennis. And I think that's right. And it is the World Cup of tennis. That's what it should be. And I think there is a place for that in tennis. But there's so many things that it's not a World Cup of tennis. For a start, it's every year. I don't know any sport that has a World Cup every year. Cricket's getting close with the T20s, but realistically that's supposed to be every 2 years, and actually it's getting a bit close to saturation now, even though England won it. So make it every 4 years, make it mixed, obviously. Give it a 2-week slot in the schedule, every 4 years. Get all the federations behind it, get them all around the table so that everyone backs it. Give it 1,000 ranking points, make it a big bidding process to host it so that cities can all bid. The obvious idea is to go to South America where they don't have a huge scale event like a major or anything like that. You can play there outdoors all year round, and there's a huge tennis culture, and I'm sure they could sell tickets. Don't get sucked in by a massive check from China or Saudi Arabia and just do it there. And make it a big event that doesn't come around very often. The other option is to stay in the same place all the time. But when, as we know, the WTA product isn't strong enough at the moment, and you have to think outside the box, I think that's what they should be doing. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've always felt about Davis Cup as well, to be honest. So if we're going to go down this route of calling everything a World Cup of tennis, I think the United Cup is a good attempt of a thing that's happening in kind of a big sporting nation that potentially will be quite successful because they will get big names and it will work quite well as a mixed thing. But whatever you do with this event, it ain't going to have a chance if you're sticking it on a different continent a day after the event where the world's best singles players are all playing and are picking up 15 million quid to go and play there. I mean, that just ain't happening, no matter what sport you do. So, the LTA, we criticised some of the WTA finals for not doing the outreach with schools. I know the LTA did some of that this week. I'm not saying, they'll have done everything right, but they've done okay with a fairly poor hand, I would say. If it were me, I probably wouldn't have put it on in Glasgow, to be honest. I'd have probably lobbed it in London purely from the perspective of there are more people there. And I know people get really annoyed at things just being lobbed in London. But for that level event, it was always going to be tough to sell in a city where, there's been some great Davis Cup things, but there was that obvious tie with Andy Murray.
That's the thing. There are no Scots
coming there.
There are no Scots.
That's the big seller. I know there's this constant thing about building on the Scottish legacy, etc. But for a random pull, with all due respect to people like Harriet Dart, if Raducanu was there and they'd have used her being there and advertised it properly really well, then maybe that was where it went slightly wrong. But I know the LTA have been slaughtered in the past when they've used people to advertise events. Queens, I'm thinking of here, for people who they've known pretty much aren't going to turn up. And I suspect that was possibly the case with Raducanu as well. So, but yeah, you're right, James. I mean, tennis has got so many fundamental problems, and I don't know if you had this on the schedule in the end, but the kind of discussions that the PTPA have this week, I think, are quite interesting in terms of where the volatility is with this sport and how it links to golf. Is, the PTPA is saying we're not setting up our own tour, but we would welcome that. And there's a real danger this is going to split, because fundamentally this sport isn't being well run. And I agree with the players on that in many ways, but it is bloody difficult as well. How to house this many players, give people the opportunity to make it and yet have such a top heavy sport. It needs a fundamental rethink, as I've bored you all before as well, environmentally as much as anything else. That needs to be factored in as well. I know people in the ATP are having those conversations. That's great, but it ain't an easy task, and you've got too many actors who just will not move. I'm thinking, Indian Wells, that tournament makes no sense in the calendar in a properly designed sport. I know you guys say it's a big event and whatever, but you have to make sacrifices to kind of do the good of the tour. And I think that's the sort of thing I have long said needs to happen, but making it happen is very difficult, James. So I wish you the best of luck in hammering that drum.
Well, I mean, you can't make an omelette without having some long and difficult conversations with some eggs, and I think that is what they need to do. I remember having my very early days of my career saying to my boss, well, why can't we do this? And he's like, well, yeah, we can, but what are we going to stop doing so we can do this? And that's the thing. It's a closed loop to a certain extent. Yes, you always want to grow, but you've got to know what you can do with what you've got. And that is the challenge. You mentioned the PTPA, George, and you're right to do so, because they have been, the executive director, Ahmad Nassar, has been talking this week, and it is kind of a story that splices in between the future of the game and Saudi Arabia's role quite nicely. He was on the Sports Pro podcast. Sports Pro, by the way, is Sports Pro Media are really great for these sports business stories. I get their newsletter, it's really good. He was on the podcast and he said when the PTPA was created a few years ago, there was a presumption that this is a rival tour. It's the only logical conclusion. The PTPA is a rival tour. A big part of what I've been trying to do in the last few months is dispel that notion and say that's by far not the only logical conclusion. I should point out, he says that's not the only logical conclusion. Doesn't mean it's not a logical conclusion. I'm not sure it would ever make sense for a players' association to operate its own tour. It's part of our job to represent these players, but also to ask what's the optimum structure of the sport over the long term to benefit of the players. But going all the way down to the fans, sponsors, tours and tournament owners. Would we partner with other people? Would we negotiate with others? Absolutely, that's our job. We will negotiate with anybody who wants to employ tennis players. We'll negotiate with anybody who wants to do things on their behalf, whether sponsors, licensees, events, or any other type of opportunities for players, because that's why we exist. That's why players created the organisation. For me, George, and you love this politics stuff, for me, what he's saying there is we're not definitely going to make trouble for everyone else in the game, but obviously we might.
Yeah, exactly. It's just really, really fascinating, I think. I've listened to quite a few podcasts. I'm not a huge golf fan, as you probably know, but I found the live golf stuff
I've
really
played golf with you,
interesting.
so I know that you have no interest in golf.
No would be strong, but I found the live golf stuff really did capture my interest, and I genuinely, I've thought about this for years. Djokovic has always alluded to this when this was all starting, talking about like moving Wimbledon to Qatar or whatever. He's kind of said these flippant things, but at the end of the day, the players believe they're being underpaid, and they believe tournaments are taking too much money. So if you've got a giant financial backer, like I imagine it would be the likes of the Saudis or Qatar, they would pump this money in. Now, the bigger question obviously is, Djokovic and co. And I'm not pointing this just on Djokovic because it's not him. There's a lot of people in this organization, but he's been the spearhead of it. They're always arguing that it's going to be they'll make decisions for the best thing for all the players. But I find it hard to believe that this massive money would be there for, say, world number 300 or whatever. And that's the thing that needs to kind of fundamentally change in tennis, is like giving people more opportunities up the ladder, a better distribution of wealth, if you like. Realistically, this sort of thing is only going to put more money in the hands of a select few, in my opinion. I think the ATP, though, and the WTA, they need to be worried because this thing is happening, and they'll have looked at the success in inverted commas of the names they've attracted across. I don't know what you'd consider to be success, or like how much they're pulling money in or whatever, but the reality is they have got some huge names going across, and it's very possible that could happen with tennis, particularly for someone like Djokovic, where winding down his career can probably just make a fun living selling tickets or whatever if he achieves his goals in this tour. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But there's a lot of things that need ironing out, and a lot of tension that's been in the water for a long time. And these comments will only make people more nervous, I think.
And what's kind of happened in golf quite quickly, and it's quite interesting, is that the PGA Tour, and to an extent what used to be called the European Tour and the DP World Tour now, have kind of responded and said, okay, well, let's make it better for the players on our tour. And that's the point. That's why competition is good. And I hate to say it, but it does mean that Live Tour has achieved something in that sense. Obviously not necessarily what it sets out to achieve, although it is what Phil Mickelson said he wanted to achieve, that it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to create a pretty big bargaining chip. And I'm sure that that's what will happen in tennis. Now, Nassar says that golf is, quote, the perfect contrast right now to what our approach is in tennis. In tennis, what we're trying to do is push for improvements within the existing structure. Now, I think most people who know the existing structures in tennis, Calvin, will know that they don't want to change. The people who run the game don't really want to change the existing structures because it works for them. And I wonder if the players have enough leverage, without the threat of walking away from certain tours.
Yeah, the problem I think with tennis is that a lot of the tournaments, they're big events for the people that organise them and for the towns that they're in, and they won't give them up. Like, there's no way that, as much as George argues about Indian Wells will be there as long as the Grand Slams. That won't move. There's more chance of Miami moving, but I don't think Miami will move either. Because it's a showpiece of the USTA's national centre. And then you look at the smaller tournaments, things like Vienna and Basel and Stade and stuff like that. They're not going to move because they're huge events for the towns and the cities and the organisers and the arenas and that kind of thing. So I don't really see how tennis will move. It's always Djokovic who's basically trying to make out that it's about something else, and it's always just so he gets more money. That's what it comes down to. That's why he wanted. I mean, to be honest, the end of year final should have stayed at the O2. It was the best place for it, and he made out that he just wanted it to change. He didn't. He wanted more money. Turin were offering more money, but the event was actually better at the O2.
Funnily enough, just watching Djokovic getting quite wound up by the crowd in Turin, so it's not all worked out quite how I wanted it to. But I think the thing that the players will always say, and I can't remember, it's one of the Americans, either Query or Isner, or maybe a Pelker actually, always says is, we don't see the accounts for these tournaments. We don't know how much money they make.
he thinks that the players always think, and this is the stupid players think this, that they don't get a big enough share of the money that is made. And I've got 2 points on that. One, they get paid an absolute fortune. Like nobody should be getting £2 million for winning a tennis tournament, which is what the winners of the slams get. The first round prize money on these places is upwards of £60,000 now. Like that's a huge amount of money just for getting a draw. Now, yeah, the tournaments make a fortune, but it's all right saying we don't get to see the accounts. They're all accountable for. You look at where the money goes. It goes in development, that kind of thing. It goes on the lower down tours, which people like Novak Djokovic and Riley Opelka would just ditch. They wouldn't never admit it, but they would ditch it. Those tours should be getting more money, not the players in the Grand Slams, and absolutely certainly not the players in the latter stages of Grand Slams, which is where Novak Djokovic wants the extra money going.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that, to be honest. I mean, tennis needs an ecosystem that sustains itself.
If you look at the money that has been spent, I won't bore everyone now, but it's easy to find on the ITF site. Look at the amount of money that has gone into tennis in Africa in recent years. And you're starting to see a few African players coming through now. There's a couple of decent juniors coming from the Ivory Coast and that kind of thing. Where do people think that money comes from? It comes from the Grand Slams. That's where the money comes from. Look at how popular tennis is in France and look at where the LTA gets its money from. And you can argue that those countries shouldn't just get more money just because they hold slams. No, they shouldn't, but the money does get spread around a bit as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, there's probably too many tennis events and the money isn't equitably shared enough. But yeah, I mean, putting it in players' pockets at the top of the game, I don't really see who that helps.
Yeah. I mean, the other point that's probably worth making is that the ITF attempted to kind of revolutionise the lower rankings, bringing in that ridiculous ranking system and kind of messing the whole thing up horribly. But the notion to actually try and reform that at those levels was right. And the idea there should be a massive conversation about how that level of tennis works and how we make that, more successful. And I've always kind of advocated, I think, this is maybe a bit of an odd example, but I'm always got a bit of a hippie environmental head. But, to cut out a bit more of the world traveling of that and have like 3 domestic leagues in terms of continents, an American, a European one, and then you kind of graduate onto the Pro Tour that way. That saves people money. It means they're not traveling, it makes it more accessible to people. It gives people more of a chance to kind of do it from home. And also, added bonus, stops, number 1,000 who's coming from, daddy's trust fund, traveling to 65 countries in a year. That's the sort of thing you can change. So it needs to be a real holistic reform of tennis, and we could bore people on this of a podcast on its own and kind of go through every single point, but it's really, really challenging when you've got so many individual actors in there who are the tournaments in some ways, and that's where the players will go against it, because as you say, it's not in their interest to support a lot of this stuff. But tennis needs a realistic conversation about how it positions itself in a difficult entertainment market.
Well, I will say, I don't know whether people know this, but for next year, the prize money in Challenger tournaments is going up 60%. Now we haven't, 60%. Now we haven't actually heard how that's going to be distributed yet. I think there's a suggestion that they're going to have more tournaments, so it's not actually like every player who gets to a certain stage is getting 60% more money than what they would have done this year. I think it's going to be more tournaments, that kind of thing. But that's a good thing. And again, where do the players at the top of the game think that money comes from? And that money should be going to those players. Tennis has a problem with this, that lower down, there's not another sport where if you're ranked 106, if you're the 160th best footballer in the world, or basketballer, or even cricketer, you're making a serious living. If you're the 160th best tennis player in the world, you're scraping by trying to break even. And that's unsustainable for a sport where the best in the world are making £2 million for winning a Grand Slam.
Yeah, and I write a lot about Formula One, and as you guys know, I've written a book about Formula One. I'm writing another one, and both those books are about young guys who are still relatively young who've come through the Formula One ranks, and that is a sport where you need a lot of money behind you, and that is a sport where they're realising that they need a more sustainable ecosystem. And 10 years ago there was one young driver program, maybe 2. Now every team has a young driver program. There's lots of organisations pushing people through karting and through the younger ranks of racing because they realise that You can't have a sport where no one can dream of being part of it. You can't have a sport where it's just billionaires and their kids. There are still those people, and it's bad. It's bad for racing. The guy buys the team and gives his son a job. It's not a good look for the sport. As you say, George, we could bore people on this all day, but we don't have all day. We have just a few minutes left, and we've got a crucial question for Calvin, which I believe came in on email, and I don't have in front of me exactly who sent it through, but Tim Mason, there you go, sent it through on email. Firstly, short question, Calvin, could you say the word?
Mem.
Mem. I believe, Calvin, the accepted pronunciation is meme, or as Bryce Harper, the famous baseball player, once said, May. But yeah.
I'm from Barnsley and we don't use normal English here.
So. Let's move on to something you know a bit more about. Secondly, why is it that the best British doubles players don't play together for any length of time? Is it the side they play? Is it styles? Is it personality? Tim also says, love the pod and what you all bring to it. But Calvin, I suspect you have a lot of answers to this.
Yeah, it's multifaceted actually, with a few layers, and Tim has touched upon a few of them there. So I'll go through them. One is the side that you play. It's not doubles is not just you can slot in either side. Some players can. Some players play both sides. Not many. Other players prefer a side, and there's quite a lot of tactical intricacies and technical things that play into that. That some players are more adept at playing ad. Some players are more adept at playing deuce. So you can't just switch. That's like, I was thinking about this earlier. That's kind of the equivalent of a footballer buying a footballer and playing him in a different position, and that kind of thing. Or cricket, like selecting an opening batsman and then playing him at number 6.
Yeah,
and then wondering why that hasn't worked out.
Specifically, I think if Jamie Murray, is it right? He for example only really plays one side.
He can only play deuce, but that's a technical problem he has where he couldn't play on the ad. Whereas other players, they might play on deuce because they're very, very good at playing deuce. I know that, for example, Luke, who I coach, and I'm not saying that Luke's better than Jamie Murray on the deuce, but Luke is very, very good at on the deuce court because of a couple of particular returns that he likes to play that not many players can play. So yeah, and also playing into that, left-handers would usually play on the deuce as well. So again, if you've got a left-hander and a right-hander, and the right-hander plays deuce, it wouldn't make sense that one of them has to go to the other side, because basically you can have both forehands in the middle of the court, which is ideally what you want.
So we had this conversation in Glasgow last week, and how Britain, and it kind of spun off what Dan Evans was saying to me a few weeks ago about doubles, and how we haven't actually had much success in Davis Cup doubles recently. I mean, is there an obvious British pair who would gel together in terms of that they play, the opposite side to the other, who we should be saying, right, you two lads, do what Mektic and Pavic did, go and play together, win Olympic gold, win some Grand Slams, win us the Davis Cup?
Well, again, that touches on the other things, which is personality, and that you always really you want a leader on the team, an emotional energy leader. So even if you play both sides, like for example, I think there's a feeling that Joe Salisbury and Neil Skupski play. Joe plays deuce, Neil plays ad, but neither of them are really a leader. So there's a danger that you get a quiet energy there, which is not really what you want. Whereas the guys who they play with, Kulhoff and Ram, are more expressive in how they are in their personalities. But also that's one of the reasons. But the major problem is, even aside from all that, along with the sides, is the ranking system and how players get into tournaments. So basically, even if British players were to play together and rise up the rankings, until you're in the top 20 in the world, really, you're never guaranteed that you're definitely getting in a tournament. So you're basically going to have to team up with somebody who is already of that ranking that would get you and them combined into the tournament. And then one of two things happen there. That partnership doesn't work, and you just go back to the drawing board and try and find someone else, or hope you get in with the other Brit. Or the partnership does work when that happens. And then you've got into the major tournaments with a guy or a girl who's your partnership works with, and then why would you go back to playing with somebody else when you're in the tournament and you're in a good partnership? And that's what's happened many times. So your only real way that you're likely to see a British pair play together like that is if they literally just keep on winning and winning and winning right through the levels.
If only we knew an all-British doubles pair who just keep winning all through the levels.
But yeah, I mean, joking aside, I know what you're hinting at, but that's only challenger level.
Yeah,
and that's not really where the problem comes. The problem comes getting into the issue. The main issue, James, is that there are the tournaments that there are most of in the calendar is 250s and 500s, and 250s and 500s only have 16-player draws, so they're the hardest tournaments to get into.
right.
So you could have some Brits who think, yeah, we can play all the slams together. They probably mean that then they're only playing the slams together.
Right. We've got a few other things to mention in the last little section. Firstly, Andrei Rublev beat Daniil Medvedev today. We will talk about the ATP World Tour Finals next week. They've just started, so it seems a bit redundant to start reading too much into it, other than the fact that Rafa Nadal lost, but says he is at least still in the tournament, although he feels a bit rusty. Andrei Rublev beat Daniil Medvedev and wrote on the camera afterwards, "Peace, peace, peace, all we need." That's an incredibly brave thing to do, as we've discussed so many times. For any of these Russians to come out and say anything really anti-war is pretty brave. So good on him, especially in what was an all-Russian event, all-Russian match. Caroline Garcia, who we actually did discuss a bit last week, although she hadn't yet won the WTA Finals at that point. She has now won it, so congratulations to her. George, I'm going to give you 30 seconds of any other business if you had something you wanted to mention.
I think the only other thing that happened last week that's probably worth mentioning is well done to Brandon Nakashima winning Next Gen Finals, beat Britain's Jack Draper en route. I wouldn't say
Calvin's
Nakashima's
jumping in. Calvin's jumping in, George.
I would say I saw a really interesting stat on that today, that for every time that the Next Gen Finals have taken place, the winner of it in the year after has either made the top 10 or the semi-final of a slam.
Yeah, Hyun Chung, of course, the first one, I think. Sissipas was the another one.
Carlos
Maybe,
Alcaraz, Yannick Sinner, I think, as well.
Sinner, yeah.
Alcaraz.
That's all we've got time for on the Love Tennis podcast. I've been James Gray, they've been George Bellshaw and Calvin Betton. Please do leave us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts, and most importantly, please do come back next week.
Sports Social Podcast Network.